Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, September 15th, 2011. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. But this week, Andy can. Our buddy Andy Sparks is joined by fellow homebrewer Dave Johnson as they use Andy's new pressure cooker to can wort for starters. If you're new to homebrewing or would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And we have a show page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we appreciate your support. And there is now an amazon.co.uk link on there, too. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. And you can find our apps on the iPhone and Android stores, and we're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, too. We've actually got time for the mailbag this week. I got some responses following last week's show where we talked about combining brew in a bag with a cooler instead of mashing in the kettle. There was this from Hugh in New Westminster, British Columbia, in Canada. Hugh says, I was interested to hear the question about doing brew in a bag and a cooler. That's how I've been doing all grain since I started, and it works well for me. As you say, there's not too much difference between this and batch sparging. However, there are two advantages for me. Hugh says, first, as Steve suggested, the cleanup is easier. All my water goes into the cooler, and because it's lined with the bag, it's easy to clean up. Second, the cooler lets me split my brew day. I mash in the night before, let it sit overnight, then start boiling early the next morning, typically around 5:30 a.m., since that's usually when I wake up. I lose maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 or so Celsius overnight, and that hasn't seemed to hurt my beers any. After the boil, chilling, and cleanup, I'm usually done by 9 a.m. Hugh says, why bother doing things this way? Because by brewing Friday night, Saturday morning, I can spend the rest of the day with my family. 2 sons help me pitch the yeast, and then we head off to a playground to give my wife a much-needed break. Well, that's nice. One other note, Hugh says, you're right about how hard it is to adjust the temperature when you don't have the kettle underneath to heat things up. However, I've found that between the mini strike water temperature calculators and taking careful notes on how my system works, I can often get within a couple of degrees Fahrenheit, say 1 degree Celsius, of my target temperatures. That said, I'm not too fussed if I'm off a bit. Interesting. I appreciate that. Thanks, Hugh. Then there's this from Calvin in Staplehurst, England. Calvin says, I brew using a method similar to the one you were discussing. It's a kind of hybrid of brew in the bag and a lauter tun. I use a 5-gallon cooler with a mesh bag in. I mash and batch sparge, draining the mash through the bag from a tap using the bag like a false bottom. The bag sucks up to the tap outlet and slows the flow down so I get a nice, clear wort. It works great for me, having been doing it for about 3 years now. Well, there you go. With so many inventive homebrewers out there, it's kind of hard to come up with a new technique. So I'm not surprised that brewers have been doing the brew in a bag in a cooler technique. I'm going to have to try that this winter. Speaking of being inventive, Tobias writes with this, I swear my low-tech lagering is lower than yours. I wish I had seen your video before my last brew. I mash, lauter, and boil all in one kettle, basically an electric urn for preserving food. I've had a problem with a thermoguard shutting down the urn, so I made a kill switch. During mashing, I was about to raise the temp, and the guard set off. Flipped the switch, and nothing happened. Cursing like a madman, good thing my family wasn't at home, I decided on decoction mashing, brewing in the basement and the kitchen being on the ground floor. There was some running up and down with my small kettle full of boiling mash. Just waiting for an involuntary somersault. As I was finished with mashing, the urn worked again and the rest went as planned. Since the fridge I was waiting for didn't arrive on time, I had to come up with a plan for lowering the ambient temperature for the fermenter. I took a styrofoam box and put the vessel in it. Cooling blocks were put around and above the vessel. A couple of hours later, I was down to exactly 12 degrees Celsius. Wonderful. Now all I have to do is change the blocks 2 times a day. High in work, but really low in tech. Thanks, Tobias. And Tobias is from Sweden, by the way. I don't think I said that. Well, speaking of cursing, you like my segues this week. Trying to go smoothly through. Speaking of cursing, Dave writes in with this. Dave says, I brewed a Saison on 8/20/11. It has been in secondary for a week and is drying out nicely. Still seeing a burp from the airlock every 10 seconds or so as well. I dry hopped it this morning along with a BPA. I assume that's a Belgian pale ale. After I replaced the airlock on the Saison, I noticed that the airlock was bubbling away like there was no tomorrow. I thought that's pretty weird. It didn't occur to me to unwrap the thick towel from around the carboy, that he had that around there for light protection, to get a glimpse of what was taking place inside until a moment before hops and foam started coming through the airlock. There must have been a lot of CO2 just waiting for some nucleation sites, in this case, hop pellets. I danced around in place for about 30 seconds while declaring the holiness of many unsacred things and acts before collecting my wits and running for a bucket, the Star San, and the blow-off hose. It was like Mentos in the Coke. In over 6 years of serious brewing, I've never seen this kind of hair-raising event. Does it happen often? Should I have known? What gives? Well, Dave, I've never had that happen. Have you guys? I'm assuming that you're right. It's sort of the same thing as happening as with the Mentos and Coke. There's carbonation in there that's just waiting for a trigger to set it off. You said that it was bubbling every 10 seconds or so it sounds like there was some activity still going on. So, wow, what a mess. Thank goodness you didn't just throw in the hops and walk away and leave it there. So, if you've had a similar situation, let me know. Oh, and by the way, send in your brewer's software comments as well. I've gotten some of those from last week's show. Calvin was one of those who sent me some comments. So if you're using brewing software out there and you want to either recommend or advise against any, let me know. Okay, if you check out this week's Basic Brewing video episode, you can see the process that we're going to talk about today. You can see Andy's pressure cooker and how we used it. Andy loves to cook and is owner of thehomebrewery.com, thehomebrewery.com. He obviously loves to brew, so he has quite a collection of tools and toys related to cooking and brewing. And this past weekend, he invited me over, along with fellow brewer Dave Johnson, to check out his new pressure cooker. And that noise in the background is a pressure cooker going off in Andy's kitchen. And in Andy Sparks, we can assume that this isn't going to explode, right?
Well, I sure hope not. That would be a real mess. It would probably hurt, too.
You would think so. Yikes.
No, I think it has plenty of safety mechanisms to keep us safe.
And one of the safety mechanisms, we're hearing the little in the background. There's a little, and we'll talk about that a little later on. So if you hear some noise in the background, that is steam actually escaping from the pressure cooker as we're going along. And Andy Sparks, we are at your house. We're Canning Wort, and we'll talk about why for a minute. And a new man to the podcast, Dave Johnson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, James. Glad to be here.
And what do you do? We have you here for a reason, because you in your professional life, you deal with a bit of this kind of thing, right? What's your official title? What do you do?
Well, my official title is surgical technologist. I deal a lot with sterilization and the practice of surgery.
So you are the guy who makes sure that, or attempts to make sure that there are no little buggies in the operating room or whatever that will get into the surgeries and make life a living hell afterwards, right?
I'm one of many people that are paid to make sure that doesn't happen.
And we are thankful for you, and we appreciate your service because, otherwise we'd be like the Civil War, where people were, before they knew about germ theory, they were reusing, surgical saws from one patient to another and things like that. And I think gangrene killed more people than the actual wounds from the bullets themselves, right?
Yeah, we actually use the term Civil War surgery. It won't get infected if you just cut it off.
And this ties back into our hobby because while we don't have to, in normal brewing, we don't have to pretend that we're in an operating room. We don't have to be sterile. We do have to sanitize our equipment. We do have to sanitize our ingredients to make sure that the yeast gets a foothold in the wort or unfermented beer before the other spoiling bugs do, right? So, there is a bit of cautiousness that we have to use in the brewing that isn't as stringent as what you do in the operating room, but it's kind of like along those same lines, right?
Absolutely. Given my professional background, I go way overboard with my brewing practices. People tend to call me obsessive compulsive, and well, it's what I know. We don't have to be absolutely sterile, of course, that's a very true statement, but the closer we get to it, the better.
And I would bet you that the people who are obsessive compulsive make better brewers just as a baseline than those who aren't.
Well, we definitely make for more difficult brewers. I'll let other people speak to how good my beer is.
But Andy, I would assume that your opinion would be if you were to have a choice between someone who is brewing your beer who is obsessive compulsive about sanitization and such as that, and someone who is just relaxed and kind of lackadaisical about it, I would assume that you would err on the side of someone who has a bit of OCD.
Well, that's for sure, right? The truth is you want the sterile or the sanitary part of your brewing to be really as tight as you can, but the truth is, it's nice when people can really let go and have a little fun with their brewing too. So, err on the side of too much sanitizing, and then just be creative with your recipe.
Andy, riding the fence as the homebrew shop owner.
Of course, you need to have sanitary.
Yeah, you've got to be sanitary. But this is a rare occasion in home brewing. We are actually canning wort for use in starters later on. And in that instance, you need to have a shelf-stable product that you can be assured is not going to bite you later on. Dave, tell us about the kinds of things that we are battling against by going the extra mile of canning this wort, putting this wort under high pressure. Tell us, what we're fighting against.
Well, we're fighting against the growth of microbial organisms. You see, it's not like we're about to pitch yeast into it. It's going to basically sit on a shelf. And any organism that is not dead has a potential to grow. So we're making sure that won't happen by putting it through the sterilization process.
So in other words, if you make a wort and you boil it, you're essentially sanitizing it. And then when you chill it and you put your yeast in, once that yeast gets going, it starts to create alcohol. and creates an environment, and lowers the pH, and kind of creates an environment that is less hospitable for those spoiling organisms just off the bat, right?
Absolutely. You have two very good preservatives, alcohol being the best and the hops being the second. Not to mention you're also in an anaerobic environment, and not a lot of organisms can deal with that. And you also mentioned the pH, which is also a factor.
So they say that nothing that can live in beer can harm you. But what we're making here is not beer. It can be beer, and it will be beer, but at this point, it is not beer, right, Andy?
Right. Right now, it's full of nutrients and sugars and other things that pretty much all the things that that we're fighting against love. So we're actually creating an environment that a lot of stuff really wants to be involved in. So we need to do something to make it uninhabitable for them.
Well, I guess we should start off by answering the question: why would you want to can your wort? Why would you want to go to all this trouble? I mean, why? What we've done is we've essentially made a wort, and we'll go into the step by step. But we've made a wort, and we are putting it through a pressure cooker, so that we will have these little jars of shelf-stable wort. Why? Why do we want to go to this trouble? What are you going to do with this stuff?
Well, the reason I'm doing it is because I'm planning to do quite a few brews this fall, and when you go to make a starter, it involves 2 or 3 steps. You have to if you're doing with extract or you're doing like a little mini mash to make your starter culture. Either way, you make a little beer, you boil it up, you have to cool it, then you pitch it with your yeast. By making the wort in advance and sterilizing it, making it shelf stable, I'll be able to have wort that is at room temperature, or basically very close to the temperature that I want to pitch my starter at. So the idea is that I should be able to come home from work, grab one of these jars off the shelf, sanitize my Erlenmeyer flask, pour some of this in there, pitch my yeast, maybe hit it with oxygen, and put it on the stir plate and be off to the races, in 15, 20 minutes, as opposed to an hour and a half, 2 hours, getting it all done. Making a starter is not hard. And everybody, should be, at least investigating doing that. But having this starter medium around means that I can make one really, really fast.
And what we're doing here is we're making 7 1-quart jars, right? These little mason jars, essentially. So with this one action of making this wort, you are creating 7 starters for the future.
Right. Actually, technically, it could be more than 7 starters because a quart is a lot of starter. So, you could make 2 starters one day. You could, split this thing into 2 flasks. I don't know about, sealing it up and keeping it for very long. Maybe one day in the fridge, 2 days at the most. But then you have to warm it back up to the temperature that your starter culture is. It might have been wise for me to make half of these in quart jars and half of these in little pint jars. And then I would have had some smaller amounts. That way I could open the jar and be able to pitch that pint, and it would be closer to a small starter. But I'm not too worried. I think I'll be able to find a home for most of this stuff.
Now, in some starters, you use one. Some starters you use less than a quart. Some starters you use 2 quarts. So it just depends on what you need to do. Now, Dave, I've heard from brewers who will do an all grain brew day, and then reserve some of the wort that they have made on that brew day, and instead of putting in the fermenter and pitching the yeast and making the beer, they'll take that wort and they'll put it in the fridge for a short period of time to use that for starters. Is that a good practice to do, or what are is that a substitute for doing what we're doing here today? What are the issues that we got to think about when we're doing that kind of thing?
Well, you can get away with doing that if you don't try to store it too long. I can virtually guarantee that whatever wort is stored using that method will not be sterile. It'll be darn clean, but not sterile. So you're likely to see growth given enough time.
So the putting the wort in the fridge, sort of like they say that if you have leftovers in the fridge, it's safe to have them there for 3 or 4 days. If you warm them back up to the heated cooking temperature, but past that, you're starting to kind of risk growth of these organisms, right?
Well, yes. In our ordinary lives, cooking, for example, it reduces, say, a bacterial load, but it doesn't eliminate it. Sterilization eliminates.
So, if what kinds of things? Not to put the scare in people, but what kinds of things are we talking about here? I mean, if you were to, on the worst case scenario, what are the kinds of bugs or the kinds of toxins that we're looking at here?
Worst case scenario, as far as toxins, would probably be a mold infection. Molds can produce some unpleasant toxins, but when you do have a mold infection, it's extremely noticeable. Most people would not get the glass to their lips.
So, but what we're talking about, is it botulism that we're thinking about here?
I have never read any case of a spore-forming organism contaminating a batch of beer. So spore formers are your really bad ones, like botulism, tetanus. There are more, but they're not jumping in my head right now. Those are the big two.
But these are the kinds of things that what we're doing here, we're going the extra mile to make sure that we don't have that kind of an issue. Because if we were to have that kind of an issue, then we're talking about some major stuff. Well,
suffice it to say, the toxin produced by Clostridium tetani is the deadliest known to man.
So, a little extra time in the pressure cooker would seem to be worth the while. So what we've done today is we have started out with a brew in the bag batch. We've started out with 3 gallons of water and 4 pounds of 2-row, and we did a brew in the bag mash. Right, Andy? We did just did 154 degrees Fahrenheit was the temperature that we shot for.
Yeah, well, that's what we shot for. We didn't really hit that. But the truth is, we're just making starter. You know what I mean? So it's really not a big deal. We were in the 150s, from 156 to 150. The truth is, it's really not a big deal. You just want to be able to get a sufficient amount of sugars into the starter wort so that when you can it, when you use it, it's good enough to get your stuff off, your sugar, your yeast started. So I think we did a good job. I think it held in the mid 150s most of the time.
Yeah, because if you're thinking about it, if you do a starter and you wait for the yeast to settle down, you're going to pour most of that beer off anyway. So it doesn't matter whether there are any fermentable sugars left in the starter beer anyway. And even if you poured the whole, say, 1 quart starter into a 5-gallon batch of beer, and forgive me for using non-metric units, but that ratio is fairly small.
That's true. There have been times when I've poured most of the starter culture into a beer because either I couldn't really separate it, was still too it hadn't dropped out yet or not. But the truth is, what we have is a fairly clean, pure tasting wort, so this should be okay. Like you were pointing out, you pour off most of it. I think you're going to be good with this stuff.
And our goal was to shoot for about a 1040 wort, right?
That's correct. I don't really know what it came out to. We still have some in that in the pot over there that we're going to test with the hydrometer here in a few minutes. But that was our point. We didn't want it too strong, or too weak. The truth is, if you're going for a beer that really needed to be either weaker, or a starter that you really didn't want to hit with very strong, where you could dilute this down a little bit. And I do know that some people basically just can the wort, like you were talking about earlier, off the batch of beer they're doing. They just write the specific gravity on the top of the can, and that way they can dilute down when it comes to making a starter,
So let's talk a bit about the procedure. You have what kind of canning thing are we looking at here?
So the canner that I have is called an All-American canner. It's all aluminum. It does not have a rubber seal. It pretty impressive looking. It has big latches, and you flip these locks up, and you kind of twist these big knobs down, and it clamps down. It's kind of a crazy looking device. It's meant to hold a lot of pressure, and so it has a couple different kind of safety devices. It has a pressure valve, so you can actually look at it and see how much pressure is building up in the tank or in the pot. It has a little weighted vent that basically the weight has a couple different holes on it, and each hole has a number next to it that basically describes how much pressure that can be vented if you put the weight on the vent pipe at that specific hole. 5, 10, 15 pounds. So you basically, just depending on what you're doing and how much pressure you need in the pot, you put the little weight on at the number. And so we've got it at 15 right now because that's the idea. We want to get it to 250 pounds or 250 degrees. So we hold it at 15 pounds per square inch, and that's what we've been doing for about 40 minutes now, I think. And it also has a safety valve, kind of this little rubber valve in it that will blow if it gets above, I think it's about 35 pounds per square inch, which is about 10, 15 pounds more than we would ever want this thing to be. So, I mean, they're very safe. There was a lot of pressure cookers back in the old days. And some of those were kind of cheap, and if you're using one that you picked up at a garage sale, I might be a little skeptical about its safety, because they're old, they're doing a lot of stuff, they have a lot of safety equipment. Kind of nice to get a new one that has modern safety valves and safety and stuff on it. Anyway, it's a really, really nice pressure cooker. This one does 7 quart jars.
And it does chicken and such.
It does chicken too. They're really incredible as far as speed cooking, because when you close it and bring it up to pressure, the actual temperature rises significantly above the temperatures that food can normally cook at. You can cook, a chicken, or make chicken soup, or make stew, in 20 minutes, 30 minutes. The thing is, when you make stew on the stove, the meat never gets above 112 degrees. The water it's cooking in never gets above 112 degrees or 212 degrees. So in the pressure cooker, it can get to about 250. So it can rapidly. And the nice thing is, it makes everything very moist. So if you're cooking something that you want to end up very, very moist, pressure cooker may be the way to go.
So, Dave, let's talk about the physics. What's going on inside there? I mean, why is the pressure cooker so much better at sterilizing this stuff than just boiling it on the stove?
Because boiling water, assuming standard pressure, is going to regulate its temperature right at the boiling point, 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
100 degrees Celsius. I know that one.
Whereas steam, you really don't have an upper limit. Once it changes phase, it absorbs, I believe about 500 calories per gram of heat. Now, that heat is what's doing the work. So the steam is a mode for transmitting the energy to that which we're sterilizing.
So we're essentially cheating nature, and we're changing the temperature of the boiling point of water, or we're changing the temperature of the steam, essentially.
Yes, we're using pressure to coop up the steam, which is at a much higher energy state than water would be. Okay, it is water.
Yeah, it's just in a different state.
And that's providing the energy for the sterilization. It's a manipulation of how things work.
We love manipulating nature. Now, the procedure that what we did was we did the brew in a bag wort, and right at the end of the boil for that brew in a bag wort, we went for an hour. We went straight from the brew pot into the pressure cooker, and you preheated the pressure cooker, right, Andy?
Well, that's correct. Basically what it is, I preheated the bottles, kind of made sure they were all good and clean, put them in the pressure cooker, kind of boiled that for a little while, and got the pressure cooker warm.
The quart jars.
Yeah, the quart jars. And then we set them up in kind of assembly line, and then we'd just dump the water out and fill them with the fresh wort with kind of a glass measuring cup.
And so that kind of makes a difference. If you were to start with cold wort, that would make a difference on the amount of time that you would want to keep the wort in the pressure cooker, right, Dave?
Absolutely. You see, the goal is to warm up the liquid to sterilizing temperature. So if you have, say, a quart of water at room temperature versus a quart of water close to boiling, well, you're not going to reach your sterilization parameter as quickly with the cooler water. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a no-brainer there.
So there is no one variable that you've got to deal with is the temperature of the wort that you're trying to sterilize. So that you couldn't just say, put your wort into a pressure cooker at 15 pounds per square inch. I assume that's the 15 pounds per at 15 pounds per square inch for 30 minutes or whatever, without knowing the starting temperature of that wort. But because if you're starting at room temperature with the wort, if you have 7 quarts of wort in there, you would want to keep it in there for much longer than what we did, which was take boiling wort and put it right in there to start this process.
Well, you could have a rule about how long to keep it in there, but you'd have to assume that you're going in cold.
No.
You can sterilize a little longer, not hurt anything. But since we went in as hot as we did, I'd feel very comfortable shaving off some time.
So overkill is always fine with this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So what are we going to do? I mean, what do we do after this process? I mean, when we reach our time, I mean, how much time do we want to spend at this 15 pounds per square inch at this pressure cooking condition, and what happens after we're done?
Well, we discussed that, and it seems like Dave has helped us come to the conclusion that maybe about 30 minutes, somewhere around 30 minutes, maybe a little longer, would probably be okay for this. So, I don't really, I think we're closing in on about 30 minutes at the time. What we're going to do is at the end of the time, we're going to just shut off the heat. And it will slowly reduce pressure down to atmospheric pressure. And that'll take 20 or 30 minutes. Then we'll open the lid, and this is important with pressure cookers. You always, as you open the lid, and the pressure cooker has to be completely to 0 pounds. You should remove the safety, the weight, and let it completely vent so it doesn't hiss anymore. But then open it and lift the lid away from you so that any steam escaping will escape away from you and not towards you. Don't open it and look inside. Open it with the lid towards you like a shield. with that, you should be good, because when you open the lid, it's going to be really hot in there still. Lots of steam's going to come out. But what we'll do is then we'll set the jars out on the counter, and we'll let them cool quietly overnight. Probably within about 20 minutes, the lids will pop down, which is an effect of the fact that some amount of pressure has been relieved from the glass jar under pressure, and now that's created kind of a vacuum. So it's going to depress the tops of the lids. They sometimes make kind of a loud click as they depress. Truth is, after they do that, you can take the bands off them. Most people leave the bands on them, and then you can set them on the shelf. But we'll let them cool by very still on the counter for 24 hours before we do anything with them.
And all that time cooling, I mean, it's to our benefit not to cool them quickly, right, Dave? As far as a safety standpoint goes, you want it to be as hot just as long as you want, or as long as it can be hot, right?
Well, that's not going to hurt us. But the thing that I'm more concerned about is rapidly releasing the pressure, because when we change the pressure in the chamber of the canner, it's also going to change the boiling point of the wort in the cans. And I'm thinking, excuse me, I'm thinking about how I do things with my sterilizer at home.
Well, you're a professional, so we will defer to your judgment.
I don't put a lid on mine, but since our jars are lidded, it should be fine. I misspoke. Forgive me.
Well, we're not gonna release the weight. We're gonna let the canner come to room temperature, come to zero pressure naturally. Now there are when you're cooking things like vegetables with a pressure cooker, you do use that technique of releasing the pressure rapidly. Let's say you're making asparagus or something, and you get it to cooked to temperature. It will only take like a minute or so to get it at 250 degrees to get the asparagus completely cooked. And you don't want to wait another 20 minutes for it to reduce to room temperature. So
you're not making asparagus mush.
We're not going to do that. No, we don't want to do that. So that's called the rapid cooling technique, and that is used in some pressure canning cooking techniques. We would not use that in this technique. What we're doing is we're going to basically let it, we're going to wait to our time limit, and then we're going to shut the heat off. And then we're just going to let it come to atmospheric pressure on its own, and that'll take 20, 30 minutes for it to do. It may take a little longer depending on the temperature of the room or whatever like that, but that's what we'll do. We'll let it come to room temperature and come to atmospheric pressure, and then we'll open it up and set them on the counter. So we're not going to do a fast release on these.
And you know what? There may be dinner to be had, and there's Andy's Magic Beer Fridge to take advantage of. So it's not like we're in a great big hurry to cool down this the wort and get it out of the canner. So is there anything else that we are missing that we haven't talked about? I mean, this to me is a fascinating process. I love gear. I love toys. I love equipment. And to see that little weight bounce around as the steam is coming out of that, and to see the pressure gauge exactly at 15, psi.
Yeah, the whole time.
It's just amazing, and and it's just amazing to me that this little weight thing is a circular. It's a disc, and it depends on where you put this same disc. There are 3 holes in the disc. And you put this disc on this little nipple coming out of the thing, and you put it in one, and it's 5 pounds per square inch. You put it in one, and it's 10 in another. It's the same weight. It's just the shape of the hole that determines how much steam is coming out of it. That is it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to me too.
I'm a geek. What can I say? I'm a nerd. But this is fascinating, and we've had requests for a long time about doing a show like this, about how to can your wort. And, I just haven't had the gear. I haven't had the equipment. And I appreciate, Andy, I appreciate your suggesting this once you've got your gear. And so far, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've really had a lot of fun with the canner so far, the pressure cooker. Whether you're cooking with it, I would suggest do a little, search on the internet for, pressure cooker recipes. You're going to find some amazing ways to feed your family real fast with a pressure cooker. But besides that, if you want to do the sanitation and sterilization of things, whether it's, objects that you want to, sterilize prior to using, little,
metal things that won't melt.
Right, yeah, like, a stainless funnel or something.
Or a coupling of some sort or whatever.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool for that stuff, but for things like this, you're making sterile starter wort. But there's also a whole world of preserving and stuff and home canning that you can really. There's just a huge world to investigate out there that I know your listeners are kind of into that whole.
You're halfway there if you're a home brewer already.
There you go.
Well, thanks, Andy. And and you can find these on Amazon.com, right?
That's true. That's where I got mine.
Shameless plug. And Dave, thank you very much for your expertise and the sort of scientific background as we're doing this to kind of watch over our shoulders and make sure that we're doing this right.
Thank you. It was a hoot.
Yeah. Hopefully you've had fun.
Yeah, it was a blast.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Andy and Dave. That was a fun day. And the wort in the quart jars was beautiful. And if I know Andy, he's already made a starter with at least one of those jars. He was itching to do it that night, but they were still hot. Very cool. Be sure to check out the video episode and see what we did. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. And we've got combo deals on our site if you want to save a few bucks, and we've also got shirts in the store too. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs in their shops on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are the Homesick Texan Cookbook and Tire Flies Spoke Spider Motion Activated Light Blue. Cool. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, or the Amazon.co.uk as well button there. We appreciate your support. Don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through our associate links on basicbrewing.com as well. That's all until next time. Till then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.